This video is going to discuss another one of the profitability measures that are used to measure financial success or financial health of a farm business. This particular video is going to refer to something called cost of debt. I don't think you'll find this one in your textbook. It's usually referred to as COD, cost of debt. Not a lot of farm business records courses teach this particular one. I've used it over the years. I actually learned it from a very good friend of mine many years ago, and it really helps to understand the relationship between return on assets and return on equity. So this cost of debt is very related to return on assets, return on equity, and cost of debt. Now, cost of debt is an easy concept. Cost of debt is simply equal to total interest of a business divided by average total liabilities. Now, one of the other videos showed you how to calculate the average total liabilities, and I've actually already transferred it to this page. So cost of debt is simply equal to total interest, which is $78,794, divided by 785,015, and that number will give us a cost of 10.04%. Okay? Now I want you to remember when we calculated these numbers in other videos, return on assets was 14%. The return on equity was a little over 17%. And the cost of debt now is just a little over 10%. Now I'm rounding these numbers just for convenience. The cost of debt, folks, sometimes people will say it's an average cost of debt, but it's not a true average because a true average would have to be weighted by when loans were made and how much the loan was and a bunch of different factors. But it does give you just kind of a snapshot of what kind of interest rate was being paid. Because common sense, if you take total interest over the total amount of debt, you are getting, in a sense, you're getting kind of an average interest rate. Okay, now, so how does that relate? If you'll just use your logic. When we calculate ROA, we were dealing with the farm as if it had no debt, so all of the assets were equity. When we calculate ROE, we assume the business had some debt, so we were calculating rate of return just on the owner's investment, but the owner's investment wasn't the total assets. Now, what if you could borrow money at 10%, okay? And then you could earn money at 14%. Again, now looking at these numbers over here. Now, when you borrow money at 10% and you're earning money at 14, then the borrowed money is yielding you a plus 4% rate of return. Now that plus 4% on the borrowed money causes the return on equity to go up. Okay? So what happens is if you can borrow money at one rate and earn money at a higher rate, then what the return on equity will actually be higher than the return on assets because you're making extra money on the borrowed money. Now the danger of this is that the return on assets is a function of prices and yields and things like that, and the cost of debt is a function of what the bank charges you. So you put yourself at risk when you borrow money because this number, return on assets, could fall if the price of your commodities fall. But it does not change the fact that if you earn money on total assets at a rate higher than the interest rate, then debt actually helps your return on your equity to increase. So you end up with a relationship that looks a lot like this, and this is very important. If the return on assets is greater than the cost of debt, then the return on equity will be greater than the return on assets. Conversely, if the return on assets is less than the cost of debt, then your return on equity is less than the return on assets. And if that's true, you may have to dip into your equity to pay the interest back to the bank. That's why a lot of times we refer to this as financial risk. But if you take any business and you've got a good set of financials, you can calculate the rate of return on their assets, the rate of return on their equity, and this thing called cost of debt. And you can actually determine if debt is helping or hurting this farm. In J&J Farms, debt is actually helping the farm because without debt they'd be earning 14% on their equity. But with debt they're earning 17% on their equity simply because they're able to have a rate of return on assets greater than the interest rate. But please remember the risk comes in that the rate of return is a function of prices and yields. And that's not true about the cost of debt. That's a contractual rate with the lender. So you could think this return on assets was going to be larger than your cost of debt, but that would be based on projected yields, projected prices, and those things could change and cause you to actually have a return on assets less than the cost of debt, and that would cause the return on equity to fall below that return on assets.